Let me give you just a quick thing to give you a perspective here. I was sitting at an anchor desk for most of that time. Jeff was running all over the countryside trying to cover this story as a radio guy. That is not easy. That is not easy at all. He had the toughest day. I just had the iron butt day, sitting there on the anchor desk for 16 hours. We'll tell you a little bit more about that. Let's go ahead and get into our graphics here. This is Tracy Neal, and this is our team at Fox 5. I went to work there in 1999 and worked there until spring of 2002. Very nice group of people there. This was our smiley face pictures that we have. But this particular picture is not so smiley face. If those two people look tired and worn out, it's because it was taken at about 1 in the morning. We were on the air when all of this happened. Our station was on the air. Our morning show was there as it began to happen. And then we took over at 10 o'clock and went on until 2 in the morning. It was, I can't even begin to describe it because it was so difficult to be able to vet information as we were getting piecemeal. Remember, this is pre-Twitter, this is pre-push alerts, this is pre all of that stuff. We had Associated Press, UPI was still in effect. Reuters, that's right. So we were really relying on that, and frankly, we were relying on people like Jeff who were posting stories.
So I was working for Cybercast News Service, which is the world's first internet-only news wire service. We were the first wire service we were the first internet wire service that was credentialed by the White House, Congress, the Department of Defense, and the Supreme Court. And we posted stories that were carried on about 2,000 plus websites and by about 600 radio stations and a handful of television stations that never paid us.
Yes,
never mind. But it was I'm sorry, you can see it's working here. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of geography to help you understand. So if you know where Stanley's Barbecue and Sam's Club are, and this is the Loop, then you have a pretty good idea where the U.S. Capitol and the Pentagon are. A lot of people think big city and they think geographically big. The population of Washington, D.C. was 50,000 people, but it grew to 150,000 to 5 million, depending on what was going on any given day. And so that little geographic area that you now recognize how small it was the center of the universe, that in New York City during this day. This is a little bit more of a close-up, just to let you know, this was my office, which was 2 blocks to the west of Union Station, 4 blocks north of the Capitol, 14 blocks east of the White House, and about 4 miles away from the Pentagon.
Show them where my office was. It's up there by the vent. That's true. We were at 5151 Wisconsin Avenue Northwest, and the station, that was the station, and I was 2 minutes from there in the condo that I had there.
Actually, right about there.
Right about there. It was way up there. But I only had to go to the station, so it only took me about 2 minutes to get there.
So go ahead and talk about
Okay, what you're about to see, I'm going to tell you, is very powerful, even in putting this together. And again, my thanks to Richard Hall, who's back there on the cameras, who helped edit this and put it together. Looking at it, even as I've seen it a number of times over the past few days, it's powerful. So just so you know, let me just say one quick thing before we get started. I just read 2 days ago that it's estimated that 100 million of our 340 million Americans, 100 million young Americans were either not born or are too young to remember 9/11. That's why these kinds of programs are important.
What the hell was that?
It sounded like a plane crash.
Hey, Beth. What is that? Somebody hit the World Trade Center or
It's a trade center.
The World Trade Center.
Yeah. This just in, you were looking at
we have a breaking
obviously
news
very
story to tell you
disturbing
about.
live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed.
As we come on now, we have serious news of a major, very tragic event for you right now. Incredible plane crashed into the World Trade Center.
I just heard a loud boom. immediately there's speculation or cause for concern. This is the World Trade Center that was the center of a terrorist bombing some years ago. So the questions have to be asked, was this purely an accident or could this have been an intentional act? But either way, extensive damage was done.
What's this other jet doing? What's this other jet doing? Holy fuck!
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Looks like 6, 7 floors were taken out. And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running.
Hold on just a moment. We've got an explosion inside.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Okay.
Hold on, I'll tell you what's going on.
Right, oh my God, another plane has just hit another building.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're looking at live pictures of the Pentagon where there is billowing smoke. Jim Miklashevsky just reported that he heard an explosion, and right now we're looking at an aerial view of the Pentagon.
There are reports that the Pentagon has been evacuated and the White House is being evacuated. Clearly, you're seeing now
However, I'd be very, very cautious.
All of the airports across the country have been shut down. All flights have been canceled for another 7 hours, which is about 5 o'clock Eastern time, and then we'll reignite there. We'll take a look what's going on after that. The probability of extension, as they call that, is high.
Take 2 and 2, 1. This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
In Washington, there is a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon has been evacuated. And there's, you can see, perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsing. Good Lord. There are no words. We have a report that a 747 is down in Pennsylvania, and that remains unconfirmed at this point, and so we will check on that.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
And I don't know about you, how long do you think that piece of video ran? It was less than 6 minutes. But I don't know about you, my pulse is still going, and I've seen it at least a half dozen times since we edited it. It's very powerful. It was a powerful day. We can bring the lights back up a little bit if you want to, not quite as low as they were. I have to say that in that time that we were there, there was so little information that was going around. Jeff was really in the dark because, again, he was traveling, trying to get from place to place to see what was going on. I had been busy that morning working on something else, and I got a phone call that said a plane has hit one of the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. And I turned on CNN as it happened, and seeing the coverage and looked around, and oh my gosh, that's amazing. I mean, I better get myself dressed here. So as I'm putting on my tie, I watched the second plane go in, something that Jeff experienced as well.
So I'd gotten to work at 8:30 at a job that I'd been at for 2 weeks. I was in a new office in a new location that didn't have cable yet, so we didn't have a television in our office. Someone down the hall who was a pilot yelled down the hall and said, "Hey, some idiot just flew his Cessna into the side of the World Trade Center. Come look at this." So by the time I put my stuff down and walked down the hall thinking this is an accident, like everyone else initially did, I walked into his office in time to watch the second plane fly into the building live. I'm a former law enforcement officer, so cop mode kicked in. They told me later that I kind of scared people. I yelled, "Call everyone in the Capitol you know and tell them to get out now." And then I took off down the hall to go start calling people and cover the story and coordinate with my editors, because I was 4 blocks north of the Capitol, so that's where I was going.
Let me take a look at that next item there. At 9:03, this is the scene that we saw, or we didn't actually see this. A lot of this video, by the way, is stuff that has been gleaned over the past 24 years, and some of it has not been seen at all. In fact, even still, there are pieces of video that have shown up that were not available to the public before. They just had not been recovered and disseminated through the various sources that we have these days. That was that initial flight, and then the second one, as Jeff pointed out, and both of us saw it at the same time. The second plane, Jeff?
That's it.
That's 9:03, yeah. I'm sorry. And then after that, we get to the area.
So this is where Jeff has to get to the Capitol, and so all I have to do, really simple thing, is walk 4 blocks down here to the Capitol. The problem is they were closing the Capitol and evacuating it. And so I got to Constitution Avenue right here and ran into a Capitol Police officer in blue jeans and a t-shirt with his badge hanging around his neck and his gun belt on, who very politely screamed at me at the top of his lungs, "The Capitol is closed, move away from the building." So I did. I went back up toward the Russell Senate office building to see if there was any way I could get in there and talk to anybody, and I wasn't able to do that. They'd already sealed that building. But right here in what's called the Upper Senate Park, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you've been walking along and you see something, and a few seconds later your brain kind of rewinds the tape and looks at it and goes, "That was important." I walked by a gentleman sitting on a park bench, and I recognized that he was wearing a member of Congress lapel pin. And I turned around, and Representative Rob Andrews from New Jersey was sitting on a park bench out in the open during the biggest terrorist attack in United States history, because they had kicked him out of the Capitol. He was a freshman. He hadn't been through the security briefing yet. They literally told him, "Go home, we'll be in touch eventually," and kicked a congressman out of the Capitol into public, where he was very much a target. So I told Mike, I grabbed my press credentials so he could see my press credentials and that my hands weren't holding a weapon, and I walked up and I said, "Excuse me, Congressman," like this. Interviewed him very quickly, and then I said, "You don't need to be out in public." The U.S. Capitol Police headquarters was about a block away. I walked him over there, and it turned out that's where Congress was actually gathering, was in the basement of the Capitol Police headquarters.
George Bush is in Sarasota, Florida, at the Emma E. Meeker Elementary School. He had arrived there that day. He was part of a program. They were going to introduce a new education program, and that's where they were going to announce it, right there at the Emma E. Meeker School. He'd been taken aside earlier while the kids were, he'd read a book to the kids and taken aside, and someone told him, there's been a plane that's hit the World Trade Center. And then moments later, they come back to him again and say, "This apparently is an attack, there's a second plane." He leaves the room altogether, gets together with his people there, talks to the White House, talks to everybody he can, and comes back to the podium, and that was the announcement that you saw. You see the little kids there who have no idea what's going on or what he's about to do. And he announces that America has been attacked.
Just a few minutes later, the Pentagon was hit. At this point, I was still either interviewing the congressman or getting back to my office from interviewing the congressman. You were already at the station?
I had just gotten to the station, and then we found out that, again, like I said, it was a very short hop from where I lived to get into the station. Our morning crew, Lark McCarthy and Michael Gargiulo, were on the air live, and they knew about New York and had been going back and forth. This was, by the way, a Fox owned and operated station. They had 5 stations across the country, and this is one of the 5. And so they are be able to draw from the Fox network as to what's going on in New York. And then suddenly our crews on the ground say, the Pentagon's been hit. And so they scrambled to try and get this information as best they could. I was in the newsroom, but we weren't on the air yet. I wasn't on the air yet. I was trying to help, man the phones and help as best I could with Michael and Lark still on the air and to get information out there. One of our reporters, Holly Morris, had been there on sort of a feature piece, which is this is toward the end of the morning. They're supposed to get off at 9 o'clock. Toward the end of the morning, after the planes had hit, they decided to extend the coverage beyond 9 o'clock on their morning show. And so Lark and Michael are still on the air, and Holly Morris has been sent out to do this feature piece, and they call Holly and say, look, you need to get to the heliport as fast as you can. We're going to fly you to New York. They get to the heliport, and the first thing they're told is all of the aircraft have been shut down. Nobody's flying anywhere. So she says, what do I do? And they say, get over to the Pentagon, because it's just been hit. And so Holly spent a lot of time. She spent the better part of it, I would say, better part of 8 to 12 hours from there. And then a guy named Bob Barnard came in and filled in after that. I went on the air at 10 o'clock. My co-anchor, Tracy Neal, was in shortly after that. She's a little bit farther away from the station than I did. And we began, again, trying to disseminate the best information we're getting in our earpieces, and the best information we're getting through the wire services, and the best information that's available to us from handed notes across the desk as we're on the air. Most of the time, I have very little video, if any, to be honest with you, of us on the air. That still frame that you saw is about it, because we really weren't on the air that much. I mean, we were on the air, but our images were not on the air. We're talking over the story and disseminating information. One quick note here about live coverage. In live coverage on television, you are relying on your experience and what you've been through and what you know about the area and what you have general knowledge of the Pentagon. We had just done a story about the Pentagon 3 weeks before that, because they had redone a whole area. They had redone the offices. We were in there, and it was the same area that was hit. So our people had all of this video from the inside of that. This is what it looks like in the office. I mean, it was just really quite incredible. So in trying to cover this story, we're drawing on all of the information we can possibly get and taking and vetting the information as we go. That is a challenge, because you're relying on your experience not to say something that's untoward, not to say something that is going to scare people or just be flat wrong. And so you are being very careful to kind of vet and that mental colander that a journalist have to get the facts and not get the hyperbole or the commentary in there, other than the commentary that you heard that was an honest reaction. Oh my Lord, when the towers came down. I mean, that's what it was like.
So I got back to the office. That was when I found out that the Pentagon had been hit. I very quickly filed a couple of quotes from the congressman. Someone else wrote them into a story. And then I got eyewitnesses, people that I knew that either lived or worked near the Pentagon. I called them. As I said, I just started that job 2 weeks earlier. I had left a talk show. My producer was driving on the highway adjacent to the Pentagon, and the plane flew over her car into the building. She watched it happen, and she called me. And so I had an eyewitness account of what happened. I then, between when the Pentagon was hit and when the first tower fell, started to leave toward the Pentagon, and I'll tell you more about that later, but you guys were on the air talking about this.
Well, I don't know what it was like watching it in the video after all of these years, but as someone who watched it happen live on the air, this building coming down, and then literally minutes later, the second building coming down, it was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. It was like the worst Hollywood movie, tragic disaster movie you'd ever seen, and yet it was real, and you knew it was real, and you knew there were people in there while all this is going on. And you saw that video. Boy, you talk about powerful video. I don't know about you, but the people running away from all of the dust and debris and the panic that the camera captured, oh my God, you can only imagine what that must have been like. And then Shanksville. This was interesting. When I got in, we already had rumors that there was a third plane. Pardon me, that there was a fourth plane, but we didn't know where it was and nobody else did either. All they knew was that there was one. This is the information we're getting, not what the authorities knew. So little by little, piece by piece, we learned that it was a flight from Newark, New Jersey that was supposed to go to San Francisco. And that somewhere over Cleveland, Ohio, the plane was taken over, turned around, and was headed for the Capitol. And you probably remember the stories about the let's roll, the people that came and charged the cockpit to be able to stop these hijackers, and they put it on the ground at Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
So while that was going on, my job was to make the very quick 14-minute trip by subway from my office in Union Station to the Pentagon. It took about an hour and a half. It took almost 30 minutes to get to the other side of the Capitol because I kept getting stopped by every federal law enforcement agency in Washington, D.C., who literally everyone I came to checked my credentials and searched my bag because they didn't know if I had a bomb, they didn't know who I was, they just knew I was going toward things that other people were running away from, and that's very suspicious unless you're a reporter, in which case for some reason it's sane. I don't understand that. Just want to note this little area right down here, this little clover leaf. We'll come back to that later, but I wanted to make you aware of that. So the Pentagon gets hit, Mike's doing his thing, I'm on a train or walking, and I know that none of this stuff is happening between when I leave the office and when I get to the Pentagon.
The next slide that we have for you is the Situation Room. This is a screen grab from video that was released much later. We had a very unique situation in Washington, D.C. with Fox. We had such a reputation within the Fox stations that they pretty much let us do what we wanted to do. My news director, Catherine Green, and my assistant news director, Holly Gaunt, made the decision to toggle between the networks in New York and toggle back to us because the Pentagon was being hit was a local story. That was an employer there. There's a lot of government employees there. That was a major thing that was going on. And so we went back and forth and made that coverage that we wanted to be sure that they knew what was going on in our area. The other stations, an NBC-owned station in the market and the ABC and CBS stations in the market, were pretty well tied to the network. The network told them when they could go back on. They'd say, here's your break. We had the authority and the ability to be able to carry our local coverage and go to the network when we wanted to. It was a very unusual situation. And it was highlighted by this screen grab that you see with Donald Rumsfeld and the Situation Room. Can you see this monitor right here? That's Holly Morris. That's our reporter who was on the feature story and then got sent over to the Pentagon. They were counting on us to be able to give the on-the-ground coverage because the networks weren't in place yet. And we were.
So about noon, somewhere around then, I don't remember exactly, I got to Pentagon City, which is about a half mile or a mile away from the Pentagon, and had to walk back. And as I'm walking up to the building, just imagine walking next to this wall and then rounding the corner at the end of the wall. You could not see the Pentagon. You could see the smoke over the hill. But I rounded the corner and was looking down the hole into the building. That'll put you in shock if nothing else will. Here's another view with the fire crews already on the ground fighting. I'm sorry? Were those two your pictures? No, sir. I promise not to do too much inside baseball, but we had a digital camera that used 3.5-inch floppy disks to store the images, and the person who used it the day before forgot to put it on the charger, so it was dead. I have no pictures from that day.
And the little AOL man who was doing the walking had a limp.
Yeah, so, and I had, and just in case you're wondering, I had a Motorola StarTAC flip phone. There were no smartphones back then. Blackberries had just come in. So this is a view from this is actually from your helicopter, right?
I believe so. There's one after this that's from the helicopter, I think. Yeah.
And then
this is from our ground crews. This is actually Holly's crew, Holly Morris's crew. When they got sent back over, they were able to capture these images.
Can I ask a question? Because I can't remember. Did the plane, did it hit where the terrorists wanted to at the Pentagon, or was it slightly diverted as well?
They flew it directly into the side of the building. They did hit some those large light standards that are over like an interstate. They hit some of those, and they suspect that it not turned but rotated the plane a little bit, but it did go directly into the side of the building where they were trying to hit. It wasn't low or high or anything like that. I don't know if I can back up. Yeah, you can see right there. So kind of where, that's kind of X marks the spot right there, where they flew into the side of the building, between the second and third stories.
Just a quick note here. A guy who worked right down the street on Wisconsin Avenue was the manager of a Volvo store. And he had sold me a car probably 2 or 3 months earlier. And he called me. How he got through, I'll never know. They said, this guy needs to talk to you right away. He says he's your friend. He runs the Volvo store. And of course, I knew who it was right away. This guy was an Egyptian national who became a naturalized citizen. And he said, Mike, you're not going to believe this. I was driving my girlfriend to work on 395. And this jet came screaming over the top of us. There was a huge explosion, and I've got a piece of metal stuck in my window, my windshield. And I said, where are you? And he says, I'm down the street. And I said, have you called the authorities? He said, I can't get anybody to answer. And I said, well, come by and we'll document it. We'll take pictures of it. And there it was. I mean, couldn't tell what it was. It was just a big piece of metal sticking in his windshield. But there were so many oddball stories like that this day.
So this is that clover leaf that I mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective of where that's located next to the Pentagon. This is where the plane hit the building, right here, and this is where the media staging area was located. That's the clover leaf, and that's actually the way DC drivers do that, by the way, if you were wondering. But this is where I spent about 6 hours leaning up against that post right there, calling in reports and covering briefings that were held over here so that the TV crews could get the building in the backdrop as the Pentagon officials were standing up here and doing their briefings, telling people what was going on. There are a couple of things about this. There are two things that really stand out to me from that day. Number one, I met a Wall Street Journal reporter who had missed his flight out of Reagan National the night before. He was supposed to be doing an interview on the 96th floor of the World Trade Center that morning. God may have you here for a reason.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
The other thing is, and Mike will confirm this, there's a not always so friendly competition between print, broadcast, between print, radio, TV, and digital journalists. That was gone this day. There were print people helping TV people carry their gear. A TV camera operator let me plug into his camera and record audio from a briefing I had missed. We were all working together to get the story to you so you would know what was going on.
Competition was very strong. The newspapers watched all of this going on. They watched the radio people argue with the television people, and the television people argue with the radio people, and the newspaper people hated both of us.
Yeah. He's not wrong.
This, by the way, is where my reporter Holly Morris was.
Yes, yeah, Holly was. I remember seeing Holly. I didn't get to talk to her. So we were there, like I said, I was there from about noon, and at about 5 o'clock, somewhere after 5, the Pentagon Public Affairs officers came out and said, pack up your stuff, you're moving. We're at the site of a terrorist attack that we've been documenting all day long, and people with guns just told us to pack up our stuff, we're moving. They did not tell us why or where we were going. We're reporters, we try to be objective, but there was a lot of speculation. Did we see something we weren't supposed to see? Have we been exposed to something that we didn't know? Are we about to get a tour of Cuba? I mean, you know, we didn't know. Buses pulled up and they told us that we were going inside the Pentagon. At 6:42, a briefing started with Army Secretary Thomas White, General Hugh Shelton, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Senator John Warner, and Senator Carl Levin from the Senate Armed Services Committee. Actually, I think he was representative at that time. I think these were the chairs of the two Armed Services Committees. You'll never see one wall of the room in any of the video of this. There were 4 cameras there. And there were 5 Department of Defense police officers with machine guns. Before this briefing started, they told us, if any of you approach the stage, you'll be shot. And the video feed out of the building is delayed, so no one will ever know you were shot. And the last thing he said before he walked away was, "If you think I'm kidding, you haven't been paying attention today." And then this briefing started. There were a lot of us packed into that room. That room normally has about half that many people in it, and my ego requires me to tell you that there's Waldo. They did not call on me. They did not call on anyone they did not know. So, Mike.
The President speaks to the nation and tries to rally us and assure us that we will go after the people who are responsible for all of this. It helped, and then of course the 2 days later where he's actually at ground zero and is rallying America really more than just the people who were there that day. We needed that. And some of you may remember the musical concert that was put on not long after that, which again, very, very powerful. Great artists performing and again, encouraging America to be American. I'll tell you an interesting story that night after this was over with. They got off the air after 2 o'clock. I ended up, I hadn't had much to eat, just kind of snacking stuff and coffee and that sort of thing. I went to a 7-Eleven to get a Coke. I mean, I just needed a little burst of something that was bubbly and good. And I ran into the main anchor from the NBC station who had also just gotten off the air. And we shook hands and talked about the day and that sort of thing. And he said, I said, I'm here to buy a Coke. What are you here for? He says, I'm here to make a purchase. I said, what are you going to purchase? And he reached into this little deal and pulled out an American flag pen. And so did I. And I wore that sucker for probably the next 3 years on the air. Take a look at this.
So let's tie this together. 24 years ago today, 19 people, motivated by political and religious hatred, used an airplane to kill nearly 3,000 people. Yesterday, one person, motivated by political and religious hatred, used a bullet to kill one person and motivated millions of people to amplify his story. The enemies of truth are very slow learners. They don't get it. We win.
So I mentioned earlier about the 100 million young people who don't know. It's a story that we have to share. We have to remember that 24 years ago, I mean, when some of us baby boomers were growing up, I mean, the Korean War, Vietnam was probably the closest thing that we had, and even then, Vietnam seems like a long way away unless you were there. Unless you were there. We were all here for this one. We saw it happen right in front of our eyes in real time. And it is something that hopefully, in looking back on it now, will galvanize us to be the kind of people that God intended us to be, to take care of each other, to look out for each other, to help one another when we're down and out, to be there, to be present, and to raise our children with values and morals and the kinds of things that will help them deal with the world they're about to inherit. And they're inheriting quite a world. But I love the Stephen Curtis Chapman song called King of the Jungle. He said, let's see if I remember this exactly. Sometimes I think the world is going crazy, but I feel that God is on his throne. Because the Lord of the gentle breeze is the Lord of the rough and tumble, and he is the King of the jungle. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take questions? Or?
Any questions you'd like to ask us?
Well, I'll say one thing.
Sure.
When I used to do the honor flight DFW flights, took about 40 flights, about 10 years to DC with the veterans. There at the Arlington National Cemetery across from Pentagon, there's a Hilton Hotel. And on 9/11, the Air Force Memorial that now sits right there wasn't there. But there were really tall antennas on top of that hotel because it was on such a high place, I guess you'd say. When the jet came over toward the Pentagon, those antennas hit the belly of that airliner. Wow. If the Air Force Memorial would have been there, those of you that know the Air Force Memorial, they have these gigantic, beautiful spires that overlook the freeway down there, and then you have the Pentagon. If those spires would have been there at the time, there was speculation the airliner would have hit those spires and probably would have crashed. I mean, everybody would have been gone, but it would have been crashed on the freeway instead of the Pentagon. But it wasn't there.
Any other questions?
Sir.
Your reaction from what happened yesterday with the assassination, my question would be, I know that affected you emotionally like it did the rest of us, but what do you think the reaction of our country, people, us, will be following that event yesterday?
I'm going to give you a circuitous answer to your question. When I was in Washington, D.C. from 1997 to 2006 as a reporter, I thought things were bad. I thought people were mean to each other. I thought Congress people hated each other. That was a family reunion compared to how things are now. I have friends who still work on the Hill who say that members of Congress from opposing parties don't speak to each other when they're in an elevator together or walk passing each other in the hall. They will curse at each other, but they don't speak to each other. They only talk to each other in hearings and when they're testifying on the floor and giving speeches. Back then, when this happened, after I had time to process everything, I thought, finally, as bad as it is, this will be it. This will be the thing that will get people's attention. This will be the thing that will wake us up. This will be the thing that will make us start loving each other and treating each other like human beings again. I've been burned once. I don't have a lot of hope. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think the one thing that happens out of that is that people who had no idea who he was are Googling Charlie Kirk. And they're finding out more about him and what he had to stand for. And whether you agreed with him or not.
Yeah, and if you don't know, Charlie Kirk's known as a political activist, and he was. But Charlie Kirk, at every event that he spoke at, every time he set up his table on a campus, he was approached by angry atheists who were just vicious toward him. And he treated them with so much love and so much compassion and shared the gospel with them and never lost his temper and never raised his voice and never got angry. And there are just as many of those videos being shared today as there are of his political opinions. So that man did not die in vain.
There was a question back here, I'm sorry. Well, go ahead.
Well, I remember 9/11 very vividly. Many of you know my son, who is a federal prosecutor in Tyler. He was at that time a new UT graduate from the law school.
Huh?
And he was looking for a job on the computer. And he said, "Oh hell, Mom, someone just flew into the World Trade Center." And me, being a New Yorker, I thought, well, maybe somebody flew into it by accident, a Cessna or whatever, because people used to fly into the Empire State Building for crying out loud. And then when we realized what happened, it was such a horrible, horrible experience. And we were living in Austin. And I just thought, this is so unbelievable. And I was an Army officer. I had been an Army officer. And so I knew right away, once you processed, that it was a terrorist attack. And I am very fearful for our country today. Because the only ones who really understand terrorism and understand that there are people in the real world who hate us are military people by and large. Because so many of them have had friends who got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. I just wish they would play this every year on 9/11. Because unless you saw it, I had friends who jumped out of a building, jumped out of one of the towers. It's unreal. It's so unreal. Thank you so much for playing this.
Absolutely.
George.
George?
Definitely great program.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jeff, talk a little bit more about the room. I had forgotten about that interview that Rumsfeld and those guys had. I remember all the other stuff. I forgot about that. You talked about it was pretty. The military came out and pretty much said, "You better, if you get out of your seat, you're gone."
Yeah.
But what was your sense of the room during that conversation? How How were Rumsfeld, those guys, their tenor, how did they act, and what was their sense in the room that you felt?
There, in media briefings, there's always the before, while the cameras are on, and the after. There's always the joking around and the, oh, I recognize you, and oh, you're the one who asked me that snarky question last time, and that kind of thing. Then everybody gets serious while the cameras are on, and then it goes back to glad handing and all that kind of thing, or they run off to the next appointment that they have. There was none of that. They came out, they started their presentation, they took questions, and they left. One of the things, and I don't know how other reporters in the room felt about it because I didn't get to talk about it, but there were two kinds of questions that were being asked. There were serious questions from reporters who were trying to find out what was going on, and there were the ego guys who wanted to tell you what they knew that you didn't know while they were asking their question.
That's never happened.
No, that's never happened yet. We have reports that the military is doing this, and you're moving this ship there, and you're flying these airplanes here. And Secretary Rumsfeld, to his credit, I would have screamed at the guy if I'd been at the podium. Secretary Rumsfeld said, we don't discuss operational details. Next. Just blew him off. And everybody in the room was like, oh. You know? Yeah. But it's what he deserved. I mean, he was trying to show out. He was trying to tell everybody else what he knew. It was, if there was ever a this is not the time, that was it.
Leading up to that press conference, what we all found out about later was that the president had a heck of a time trying to get back to Washington that day. He's in Sarasota, and they said, okay, we need to get back to Washington. They said, Mr. President, we don't know what's going on there. We don't know whether there's another plane in the air, whether they'll try to attack you. We have no idea what's going on here. We need to get you someplace safe, and we get you there right away. So they flew him, and many of you may not know this. Frankly, I didn't know this. They flew him to Barksdale. They flew him to Barksdale, and he did not have a fighter escort until he was just outside of Barksdale. They flew him up from Ellington in Houston. And so they landed at Barksdale, and they said, well, this isn't going to work. We need to have, the comms weren't working. Everything was jammed, as you can imagine. I mean, all of the communication lines were just a mess. And Air Force One was having trouble with its communication lines. So they said, let's go to Offutt Air Force Base. They have a secure comm bunker there in Nebraska. And so they flew in there. And you see some pictures that are available now of them, they're all still photographs, of them meeting there and talking to the White House and that sort of thing. And Bush said, I want to go home. We need to figure this out. I got to go home. So he actually landed at Joint Base Andrews, which is now called Joint Base Andrews, at 6:37, and then was on the air at 8:30 to talk about what's going on. Yes?
Many of the people here in the room may recall that there's an East Texan that was lost on the plane that hit the Pentagon, Brian Jack. I was on the anchor desk here at NBC 56 on that day, and I got a phone call from my brother, his close friend named Brian Jack, who had spoken with him a day or two before. I realized he was on that plane. But the ironic thing was that Brian Jack's office was in the wing of the Pentagon that got hit.
Oh, gosh.
It was his plane that hit the Pentagon.
Oh, wow.
Gosh.
Wow.
An inside baseball story for you here that you may not have heard. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, and I'll make this real quick. The year before the World Bank had met in Geneva, they had terrible, terrible demonstrations. There were lives lost, property damaged. It was a mess. The World Bank was going to meet in Washington, D.C. the following weekend on the 15th. The chief of police, the Metro Chief of Police, Charles Ramsey, took it upon himself to contact all of the surrounding counties to D.C. in Virginia and in Maryland, and with the Secret Service and with the FBI, to be able to put together a plan for if everything just goes to hell when these people show up, that we'll be able to handle it and take care of it. What he didn't know was that he'd get to put that plan into effect a lot earlier than that in terms of taking care of that city during that time. Just one more quick thing to share, and that is, and Jeff and I both have commented on that, the day after 9/11 in Washington, for the first time, any of you that have been to New York, even Dallas or Houston, any big city in the country, at 2 in the morning, it's, the sound is always going on. Cities don't ever sleep. It was dead quiet.
Dead quiet.
It was
no pun intended.
Strange. People were were in a daze for all of that. And then by the end of the week, I stepped off a curb to go into the station, and I stepped in front of a taxi, and the guy honked at me. And I looked up at him, and he looked at me, and he smiled, and went, hey. It's kind of like we're getting back to normal again. Cabby wants to kill me. It's okay.
Thank you.